drive, and the VHC is the configuration file. Similarly, the VMX is the configuration file, and the VMDK is the actual hard drive or the virtual drive. Citrix has opted to go with the Microsoft standard, the VHD standard. Now this is good because in time, hopefully we'll have a standard that allows a virtual machine to cross hypervisors, to be able to run on different types of hypervisors. This is going to be especially important with the introduction of client hypervisors, where the hypervisor now can be installed on a laptop or a desktop and is not limited to a server. It'll be very important to be able to have a virtual machine cross different hypervisor types. So it can go from Microsoft Hyper-V to VMware ESX to Citrix Zen Server 222. That's going to be extremely important in the future to have a single standard for files that are related to virtual machines. But why virtual machines? What makes virtual machines so much different, so much better than a physical machine? A physical machine can be extremely difficult to copy, to move. You need third-party utilities. You need to have Ghost or Altiris in order to image them and then deploy them. And if they're not deployed on the same type of hardware, then you're going to have driver issues and compatibility issues. You can't move them easily. And physical machines, in most cases, will have underutilized resources. But how's it different with virtual machines? Well, virtual machines are just a combination. It's just a collection of files. So you can back them up just like you back up any of your regular files. You can restore them regardless of the underlying hardware. As long as the hardware meets the virtualization requirements, that VM's just going to come back up. It doesn't care if it's running on an Intel or on an AMD. You can move it around. You can take your virtual machine from data center A, restore it in data center B, take it from your production environment, restore it in your DR environment. It simply does not care because it doesn't have that underlying relationship. It's not tied to the physical hardware. It's hardware independent. So back to the hypervisor OS vendors. So we've chosen 3 vendors here. VMware, obviously. VMware has Workstation, Server, ESX, ESXi. Microsoft has Virtual PC, Hyper-V, Virtual Server, and Citrix has Zen Server. There's a lot of other hypervisor vendors out there. Actually, there's so much that we can't even put them all on this presentation. Phoenix is coming out with one, Oracle has one, HP's coming out with one, a lot of different vendors. But these are the 3 vendors that we think are going to have the major impact in the future on the hypervisor or in the virtualization space. And this brings us to VMware vSphere 4. vSphere is a collection of applications that make up an enterprise suite. It gives you the ability to do enterprise virtualization, gives you all the necessary applications, all the necessary tools that allows you to deploy a virtualization for an enterprise, that allows you to take out these physical servers and gives you a solution that you can rely on. There are 2 main components in the vSphere suite. You have the ESX host, noted here as VMware ESX server, and one of its major components is VMware's Virtual SMP, and we'll talk about that a little later. And then you have VMware Virtual Center. Virtual Center, now renamed to vCenter. I just wanted to make the notation here that the V stands for virtual, obviously. And it has the following components and much, much more that we're going to get into details as we move on. VMware vMotion, Storage vMotion, Update Manager. These are some of the basic features now that were introduced over the years with 2.5 and 3.0 and 3.5, and then we're going to talk about what's new with vSphere 4. But before we do that, let's take a look at the underlying structure of ESX Server. Now keep in mind we're talking about ESX here, not ESXi. And as you'll notice, the physical and logical structure of an ESX server is comprised of the underlying layer of hardware, hard drives, memory, CPU, network, etc. And then you have the VM kernel, otherwise known as the hypervisor, which allows virtualization. It allows you to have a Windows machine and a Linux machine running on the same hardware without conflicting with one another and in complete isolation. But you'll also notice the service console. Now the service console doesn't exist with ESXi. I want to stress this, especially for those that are taking the VCP exam. The service console only exists with ESX, and with the future releases of ESX, whether it's vSphere 5 or whatever it's going to be called in the future, the stated course or VMware is telling us that eventually the service console will be phased out. Now we'll talk about the service console on a different slide, but I just wanted to show you the structure of ESX server as it stands today. And again, the service console doesn't exist with ESXi. Virtual SMP, or virtual symmetric multiprocessing. What does that mean? That is the technology that allows you to assign more than one virtual CPU to a VM, up to 8 vCPUs per VM. And that's useful for application or resource intensive applications that need more horsepower, your exchanges, your SQL servers, your Oracle servers that might need more horsepower in order for them to function and be more responsive. Virtual symmetric multiprocessing gives you that ability. And now we get to the service console. What is VMware's service console? The service console is a 64-bit console operating system that interacts with ESX server and all of the virtual machines that are running on it in order to provide services like firewall, SNMP agents, etc., etc. Now the service console, you can think of it as the first virtual machine that comes up once the installation of ESX server is complete. It is compatible with a Red Hat Enterprise Linux 5.2 or CentOS 5.2 or any equivalent Linux distribution for that matter. Now it's based off of a 2.6 Linux kernel as stated here. Now all this information is very relevant, especially if you're about to take the VCP exam, so I just wanted to make that note. Now let's move on to the VM kernel. What is the VM kernel? The VM kernel is otherwise known as the hypervisor. Again, we spoke about how the hypervisor regulates access of the different virtual machines to the different physical components on that server. Now it's very important to note, and again for the VCP exam, that the VM kernel is not a Linux distribution. That is a fatal mistake on the VCP exam. Do not make it. The VM kernel is a proprietary piece of software that VMware wrote. It has nothing to do with the service console operating system, which extends services like firewall and SNMP agents, etc. that we talked about. So now we get to ESXi, the structure of ESXi. ESXi is a centrally managed hypervisor that does not rely on the service console. It is self-sufficient. What ESXi gives us is a really thin hypervisor. And what it also does is it removes an attack surface. So some of the critiques that we had with ESX server is that it had a service console. So it was more vulnerable to security or to attacks, and therefore the question always came up, do I need an antivirus for the console operating system or for the service console? How do I harden the service console? How do I prevent someone from attacking the service console? So what VMware did is with the release of ESXi, they took away that service console. So they removed an attack surface. You don't need to put an antivirus anymore. You don't need to worry about hardening it. It no longer exists. You don't need to back it up for that matter. Again, it no longer exists. So, you take away that headache altogether. Now, I will say this, and the reason the service console is still around is because there's a lot of people over the years, because it's been around for so long, have developed scripts to automate things. Third-party tools and utilities and vendors have created software that ties very closely into the service console in order to extend some of the features. So what VMware is trying to do is trying to phase it out slowly. It's telling people the service console is going away. The future of ESX is going to be ESXi, an extremely thin layer hypervisor that has the virtual center management server to run all of its enterprise capabilities. Which brings us to Virtual Center Server. Now, Virtual Center Server, as it stands today, is a Windows-based application. Now, when we were recording this CBT, there was already a Linux version of the Virtual Center Server in beta. But I'm not going to talk about that. It's just going to be a different operating system. The features and functionality are going to be the same. So we're going to focus on what we have as general availability today, which is a Windows-based application designed to provide enterprise-class features and functionality to ESX Server, or to ESX and ESXi in general. Virtual Center is what allows you to do vMotion and resource optimization and high availability and fault tolerance and vShield zones. So think of vCenter as the perfect companion to ESX. ESX provides you with the hypervisor, the thin layer of hypervisor. Virtual Center brings all of the enterprise features that you need in order to run an enterprise class virtualization infrastructure. So let's take a look at some of the components of Virtual Center. Now, all the components listed here, we're going to go into a brief description in this introduction module, and as the course progresses, we're going to dig deeper into each one of these features. Now, these are some of the traditional features that come with Virtual Center. In a different slide, I've highlighted some of the new features that are available with the release of vSphere 4.